What's going on, everybody? This is Chris Kay with the Burning the Red Shirt podcast. Got Andrew Katz with us. Another guest, another week. We have Yonke from Devy Watch with us, who more recently released like a just giant novel, something I've, in terms of like if it was like a regular, like a true book, I would never read something that large, but something that is CFB related, I'm totally in on. But Yonke from Devy Watch, how's it going, man? Glad to have you on and tell us a little bit about what you got going on.
Yeah, I'm just happy to be here. Summer here, it's 107 degrees out, or it was yesterday. I think it's 102 today. So just sitting inside with some AC, trying to, talk about college football. So sounds good to me.
Yeah. What part? You're West Coast, right?
Yeah, I'm in the valley, so it's hot and dry and allergies and miserable.
Gotcha.
Boots on the ground for the conference.
Yes. Not too far from Fresno. Yeah, I got some Fresno and San Jose State,
Oh, nice. Do you ever get to games?
Yeah. I actually never been to Fresno, but I tried to pop over to San Jose State. Like they had a Friday game last year. They played UNLV. I like going to the Friday ones because Saturday I want to sit and watch, 100 games at once. So I hate missing those. I think San Jose State plays Oregon State on the opening Sunday, I believe.
Beautiful, beautiful slate.
Yeah.
Doesn't San Jose State play USC to start the season in week 0 too?
They do. I think it's in SoCal week 0. Yeah.
Oh, but it's at USC, obviously. Yeah. Do you think USC would ever go to San Jose State? Like, would that ever? That's beneath them, right?
They shouldn't. Yeah.
Well, Virginia Tech goes and plays at ODU, so who knows? Cool. Well, I mean, we're talking Mountain West this week. We've done a bunch of different weeks. Obviously, we've done Big 10, Big 12 with Nate, Sun Belt. We've done Conference USA. So we've done a bunch of different conferences here. JD to talk Mountain West. He's on the pulse. He's right there at San Jose State, Fresno State kind of triangle. Which one do we want to start with, Andrew? Your choice. San Jose State or Fresno State?
No, yeah, let's do San Jose State. I'm a big fan of San Jose State in recent years. Like, it's been so much fun kind of when the offense has been working. It's kind of been okay through the quarterback, some receivers run and go routes and stuff like that. You kind of know where you want to go, where you need to go, I think, from a fantasy perspective, both from a season long outlook and then DFS as well. It feels like we're kind of trending similarly this year with Cordero back for year 8, right? And yeah, I personally am a little sketchy on the idea that Justin Lockhart just steps in and can be as dominant as Elijah Cooks. Like, I liked him a lot when he was at Nevada and lit money on fire on him on Lockhart last year as well. But I don't know. I've been hesitant to draft him just because I don't know if it's going to necessarily come together in the way of like an actual number one receiver. But I don't know. How do you feel about him coming into the year?
Chris or me?
JD. No, okay. Totally you, man. I'm here just for fun. You're the expert. So.
It's similar. San Jose State, like I kind of agree. Like, they're fun. The offense, you can see you want to like the offense. They should be good. Like, they still have returners. But like picking out a fantasy asset, it's really hard. Like, Lockhart is the number one guy for me, and I don't feel strongly. Like, I don't think I've drafted him. But you look through Brennan, right? His wide receiver 1 history is pretty lucrative. But outside of that, it's like, I mean, they don't run the ball super well. It's probably going to be more of a committee. Robinson's back again, his 8th year. Him and Cordero. Even Cordero, I mean, Cordero's fine, but like a lot of his production last year was on rushing touchdowns. Like, his yardage was not as good as I expected it to be. He was pretty reliant on that. So there's just not a lot of like, if Lockhart actually steps up and is that guy, I think that's the guy I'd be willing to gamble on. But other than that, I mean, they're returners. Like, it's not like they get a big transfer in, right? They're the rest of the receivers there have kind of been there a while, like the Charles Ross, Mekhi Miller. It's really hard for me to select a guy I'm high on. But yeah, last year I was too low on Cooks because like Cooks and Lockhart, I was kind of, skeptical as well, and I ended up being too low on Cooks. So now I'm wondering if I'm being too low, artificially low on Lockhart as well.
I thought for a second maybe it was you, Andrew, that got cut off, but I guess this time it's
nice.
JD and the Mountain West T. Are you back? Were you feeling good? You were just finishing up your comments on San Jose State. We cut out a little bit.
I was getting nowhere fast, so he didn't miss much.
No, it is interesting because I'm a big DFS guy, and these teams, especially Mountain West, you get the Friday night games, you get the random Thursday night game, or like just like more specifically like the 10:30 or 10 p.m. slate on Saturday. So like I'm very privy and like playing these teams. I don't have a gut feel either on any of this. I laugh because Kyrie Robinson is just here for 12 fantasy points every single week. You know, I don't know how he's going to get to 12, but he's going to get to 12. To me, this feels more interesting I mean, obviously, if we can peg a receiver one, I mean, that's awesome. Like you said, JD and Andrew, like these are that's a spot that fulfills, right? Like that's a good fantasy spot. But it feels like tight end to me has been super lucrative too. It was it Sam Olsen to begin the year and then Mazzotti to end it, and now Mazzotti's like number one. Like JD, do you have a pulse on the tight end here? Because to me, that is a good spot as well.
It is. I think those are two good ones. Olsen hasn't been healthy in like 2 years, right? He caught like that 80-yard touchdown in the opener, and I was like, "Who the hell's this guy?" And he's like super fast, like he's burning DBs. What is going on here? And then he didn't play the rest of the year. And then I remember last year, because it was one of those weird DFS slates when I went to watch the game, and I see Olsen on the sideline, like not in pads, and I saw no updates. But he's just not playing, and I don't think he played again the rest of the year. But he's supposed to be back this year. I think him and Mazzotti are going to be used pretty heavily because they have two good ones. Mazzotti just, he was like very solid to end the year, but that was without Olsen. So now but I think they realize they have two good ones. They have Olsen's probably more the deep guy, and Mazzotti's just going to, gobble up 4 or 5 catches a week. So.
Andrew, do you have a pulse on tight end, or are you kind of in the same vein? We do tight end premium stuff all the time. So
right,
goes in one.
Yeah, Mazzotti goes in a decent amount of our drafts, like in not early, but he's drafted in the range of tight ends where it doesn't feel like it's a full on gamble, and I think with good reason, right? If we're kind of sketched out by the quality of receiver, maybe they lean more on tight end position for receiving production. For good reason, it just feels like with this team we're chasing what was it, COVID year production with Bailey Gauthier and who was the other dude, a receiver, I forget his name, Trey Walker, right? It was those two. We want to get back to that kind of offense, and I don't know. I mean, it feels like we probably won't get there this year unless one of the tight ends or a combination of tight ends goes nuclear and Blockhart is a bona fide number one. But I don't know. I will always have a soft spot for Chevin Cordero going back to Hawaii days. And he was good. He was fun last year. So it definitely felt, like you said, JD, that he was like super reliant kind of on touchdown volumes, but definitely rushing touchdown volume. But that before you started recording, Chris, you I feel like it was you who just kind of decided, it was like, this conference kind of like it, like I feel like it, something you said something along the lines like, this conference sucks or whatever. And I don't know, I used to have such good and strong feelings about the Mountain West, and it feels like a lot of the teams leave us longing at this point for what was previously glory days, as they have either like had coaching staffs move on to greener pastures, or just kind of what has worked in the past isn't necessarily translating going into the year 2023. We'll cover the teams, obviously, but I don't know. Mountain West used to be one of my favorite conferences, but like half these teams, it's just like, damn, like that. I'm probably not drafting too many guys from this team.
I think there's like 4 to 5. And the reason why I said that comment pre-show is like, there's like 4 or 5 teams I think we could like gloss over and not feel bad about it. But I will say those other teams, there's a lot of them that have something super interesting. And I think we've kind of alluded to it here with San Jose State, is that like, we just don't know like a solidified option or target for like the spots that we like, right? Like San Jose State receiver one's always cool. Fresno State, that offense is always fun, but like they don't have those prominent names. It's like we got guys replacing, and we don't feel super comfortable with it. I will say to round out San Jose State, their quarterback room is super fun for me because Cordero is like a fan favorite for all of us. Jay Butterfield from Oregon is like just a fun, like, wait, what a second, what? And then to me, my personal favorite is the fact that Nick Nash, their quarterback from years ago, is now like a backup receiver, and he does like quarterback trick plays and stuff. So I think that it's just in general fun. I think Cordero's got a lot of value. I've kind of mentioned Fresno State as a team that has like, we have no idea what's going on, but that offense is almost always lucrative. Are Andrew and I kind of like alone, JD, and like not knowing who to target or how valuable specific pieces are? Or do you have some insight into, who the receiver one is, or if we feel really good about a specific running back in that room?
I think the Fresno State offense, right? Like their OCs from Eastern Washington, it's going to be similar to last year where there's a lot of passing volume, right? And they throw the ball to running backs a lot. Malik Sherrod, we'll start with him at running back. Like earlier in the offseason, his price was really cheap. He could pay off pretty well there, but the more I'm looking at it, he's like 170 pounds. They're probably going to throw more than they rush the ball. He is a good receiver, but I think for him to hit value, like he's going to need like 40 receptions.
You can blame me. I kept pushing him up in our draft rooms, and then I actually took the time to go to his page, and I was like, 170 pounds. What am I doing here? Like,
yeah,
this is like probably not going to work if I'm drafting this dude in like the 13th round or whatever.
I think the thing though with Fresno, right? Like there's not a wide receiver one. I know there's Josiah Freeman people out there, but like there's like 7 wide receivers, in my opinion, that have not separated themselves at all. Like Jalen Gill, Eric Brooks, Josiah Freeman. I even like Jalen Moss last year was a dynasty guy I tried to own. There's a bunch of guys. There's, I think, 5 or 6 that are going to see the field. It's just whether they like stick with one and the rest rotate. I think they're going to rotate pretty heavily. So anyway, I guess the case for Sherrod could still be there if you're like, look, I don't know a wide receiver to target. The tight end's not really there, but they're going to throw the ball maybe 500 times. Who should I target? I could still see that with Sherrod, but I'm not like overvalue on any of these guys.
I can see that, right? Like Sherrod's size, and he has shown like the ability to catch the ball. I don't necessarily love knowing that he's 170. It's like, it feels like Fresno State running backs that have been successful, like they earn their weight in running the ball, right? Like they were successful rushing. I would be very curious. It is a weird combination, right? Like Keene, we assume Keene is the quarterback. He's not like a great runner. He's not going to steal rushing touchdowns by any means. Like, does Sherrod at 170 still like luck his way into some rushing touchdowns, and it makes it worth it with the catching or the receptions? Like Mikey Keene is replacing Jay Kaner. Jay Kaner was awesome for fantasy purposes, relatively speaking. Is Keene any good, or is he just kind of like a guy that ended up at Fresno and we see what happens, Andrew?
I think it's interesting to think about. So we have I think when we look back on Jay Kaner's career, we look back on it really fondly. And it's interesting to consider, like, he was an absolute zero running the ball, right? And he did it all with his arm in an offense that enabled him. Like, that sounds like the same prescription for Keene, who has never, like, he's never looked inept. I think the knocks on him are like, he's a smaller dude, probably nothing with his legs, not great arm strength, but from day one, when he kind of got thrown into the fire as a true freshman at UCF, the like his greatest asset, I think, has always been his composure, and just his ability to kind of operate in the pocket. Why can't that translate moving over to Fresno? In an offense, presumably, that will be geared a little more to his strengths than a Gus Malzahn offense, right? So, I mean, you could craft a case that how he could be successful, what that means, like, from a fantasy perspective, like, I don't know. It feels like, in a lot of ways, if you're burning real draft capital on someone like that, the things that need to go right for him to be actually useful in fantasy is, like, they need to throw for so many yards or so many touchdowns, right? Because it's the only way that they're earning fantasy points. But you can dream up a scenario that doesn't feel too far-fetched, given the offense that he's going into and the skill set that he has. I don't know. What do you think, JD?
I thought you hit it perfectly. Like, I thought the same thing. Like, you match him up with Haener, and he's, like, very similar. Like, you can see why they went after him. But, like, what are his odds for hitting good value? Like, again, he's undersized. He's going to probably throw it a lot, right? But he's not really going to give you rushing, probably not going to give you rushing touchdowns. Like, to me, he's a knockoff Haener. And even if, like, this offense exceeds what we're thinking, right, and he has a big year, like, even Haener was a way better real-life quarterback than fantasy.
Yeah.
Like, he was fine in fantasy. He was good. But he was, like, low 20 points per game. You know, he was very, very steady. I'm not going to knock Jay Kaner. We all love Jay Kaner. But even he, like, was not quite a fantasy stud. He was a real-life stud. So Keen, can he operate the offense effectively? I think so, but I don't see any reason to get overly excited.
Yeah, the hard part with these types of quarterbacks is like truly their value is pretty limited in fantasy, because if they don't provide rushing upside, like they'd have to just throw crazy amounts of touchdowns and yards, right? Like Will Rogers went from top 10 quarterback to undrafted in all these different formats with the new offense at Mississippi State. So like, why would Mikey Keene be any different? So he's interesting to me. I don't think the volume will be there, but I wonder if like at the back end, he's not a bad option as like you draft a lot of riskier quarterbacks, high upside, high reward, or maybe like some guys that get hurt, like Plumlee and Finn, Rourke, these types that like run the ball enough where maybe they get hurt. So you take a Keene late just to provide like a decent floor type guy, but it'll be interesting. I'm sure about 8 weeks into the season, San Jose State and Fresno State will have us both like, damn it, we should have been on so-and-so, and here we are. But I don't know. I don't know where to go next with this. I want to get Andrew jazzed up. Let's talk Utah State. We got Cooper Legas. We've talked Levi Williams for years here on the podcast. Is it a quarterback battle, or is Legas the guy, Andrew?
Ooh. I think that the more I give consideration to it, I agree with the sentiment that like, okay, he's not going to lose the job coming out of camp, but who knows how long that leash is. Who I forget who we were podcasting with, which preview we were doing, where the idea came up of like, why does this coach keep running this quarterback so much as opposed to utilizing his arm talent a little more? And every time I watch Utah State, that's what I think. Seeing how they use Legas, like, you could probably quibble with his passing capabilities to some degree, but like, there's some quarterbacks when you watch them throw the ball, it's like, all right, that dude has no business being in the FBS, and that I don't get that sense at all with Legas. But they like, and then like Nate, CFF Nate tweeted out a while back about how Legas was like some 5 sports star in high school or whatever, like crazy track and field stuff. So maybe that is tempting to the coaching staff, and that's why they run him so much. But we've already seen what that's like with him, not even just at a macro level, with him specifically. We've seen how that's going to play out. I think he missed time with a concussion last year, and then somehow he didn't rip his knee to shreds in the bowl game against Memphis. Like, the idea that they're going to build an offense that is so heavily reliant around him running scares me. And that is one of the paths that he potentially loses work intra-season to Levi, right? Another one being like, they open against Iowa. Like, how do we really think that's going to go? There's a bunch of good defenses also in the Mountain West. Like, I like Cooper Legas, right? But I don't know. I don't get the best vibes about Utah State coming into this year. I don't mind Legas later in drafts, because I think that, like, okay, if they're gonna run him, like, I feel I don't have a great way of how to make money off it, other than just generally speaking the idea that I feel strongly about. You want to get your running quarterbacks into your lineups earlier in the season while they're still healthy and try and take advantage of that, because like these dudes always go down, it seems like, and wear down as the seasons go on. But yeah, I mean, I don't think he's going to lose the job coming out of camp, but there's lots of ways I think that one way or another we end up seeing a decent amount of Levi as the season progresses.
JD, I think year in and year out, like Utah State receiver 1 is like a pretty profitable position, kind of like Fresno State, San Jose State receiver 1s. Are we like? It feels like he's not valued as high as maybe he should be. Terrell Vaughn. Is it because of Legas and like maybe that misconception that maybe he's just like the absolute worst thrower, or are we just all sleeping on him? Like, what's your take on Vaughn and where he's being picked these days?
I'm split on him. I think I still like him at price because it's not great. And like the scheme, I mean, yeah, they had 1,000 yards 4 straight years and double-digit touchdowns on all those. The thing for me, I think those were all outside wide receivers. Vaughn is as small as they get. He wasn't starting last year. Kyle Van Leeuwen was, and he was out for the year after game 1, I think. He caught a couple passes, was like a dirt cheap DFS player. Remember that? And everyone's starting Vaughn. I'm like, I don't think he's starting. That being said, he kind of busted out, and they don't really have, like, there's nobody on the outside. Like, they have the Otto Tia guy who's been there for a while. Micah Davis is actually interesting on Air Force because he's really talented. Like, that Air Force passing attack was really fun when he was there. Like, they were first in the country in passing explosiveness, and they don't even know how to pass. It's just Micah Davis is pretty good. But, like, you can't feel confident about either of those guys. I think Vaughn's, like, the safest bet because even if he isn't that alpha that doesn't get the 1,000 yards, I still think, like, he's probably a safe bet for what, like 65 catches, a decent yardage output. So I like Vaughn. I just feel like the floor is pretty safe with PPR if you're in a full point PPR. And then if he does become that wide receiver 1, there's 1,000 yards on the table. So I think Vaughn is pretty cheap. Yeah.
It's interesting because you make a good point about the slot receiver versus outside receiver. It was interesting. I read about Otto Tia in like the spring. He blew it up, or at least had enough of a blow up for somebody to be talking about it. He's like 6'4", 220. It's always interesting when you see these like giant men. You wonder, like, is he just outperforming guys because maybe he's just paired up like against a second team defense and he's so big and fast enough that he just takes advantage, or is someone like him pretty legitimate? Micah Davis was a great call out there. He like went in the portal, disappeared, and then all of a sudden, like 8 months later, pops back up in Utah State. So that is an interesting call. I'm curious. There's just so many guys out there with COVID years and extra years of depth and stuff like that I feel like maybe 5 years ago a guy like Micah Davis would be picked, but I feel like he's just never going to be picked with the amount of receivers out there that are, you know, at the end or not being picked.
I'm waiting for Jared's Mountain West draft to hopefully get
that one will be super degenerate, I feel like, because there are so many unproven options.
Have you done that one, JD?
Yeah, so I've been in that one because I was actually thinking when you mentioned Otto Tia, like that's a guy I saw 6'4", outside wide receiver. I drafted him last year in like one of the last rounds. I'm like, you could totally see a path where he just blows up out of nowhere. And I think last year their outside wide receivers were good. The team sucks, right? Brian Cobbs and McGriff, like those were 2 established outside guys. Tia's not going to start over them, but this year could all be him. So
yeah, and he's fairly young. Otto Tia, I was saying Via. I don't know why. I was thinking maybe that big defensive tackle for the Bucks, maybe. But he's big. He's only like a redshirt sophomore, so I think he's a redshirt sophomore. So it's not like he's been, you know, uncovered forever. There's one guy. So I was going to transition to Air Force, but this feels like a good transition. Hawaii. So everybody loves Hawaii. The old days has been amazing. Were amazing years. I feel like we're still trying to get to those years again. Even like 80% would just be fun. And somebody, I think it was Bainbridge, asked a Hawaii beat writer, hey, who would be like the inside receivers? And it was like a guy named like Nishigawa in a tight end. He was like, yeah, in the tight end, you know, so-and-so. And I'm like, oh my God, like what? For some reason, it makes me feel like that correlation between Utah State of like a random guy out of nowhere. But Hawaii, we all like inside receivers for them. JD, do you have like a vibe there? You know, Bainbridge loves Chucky or Chucky Hines, but this random beat reporter mentions a guy that you've never heard of that's like 5'6". So like, where do we stand there?
I don't have a strong read at all. Hawaii is so difficult to get a read on. Even the whole thing for me with Chang, like, why didn't they go run and shoot last year? Like, they hired Chang. Everyone expects the offense. And instead they run, like, no one even knows what they were running last year. Like, what offense was that? And they have the same guy back as co-OC. Chang's still there. They hired another co-OC, but he's like a running game coordinator. He's not a run and shoot guy. So I just can't understand what's going on. I don't trust whatever I'm hearing. I think that guy has running back eligibility, Nagishihawa, whatever. There's not. I tried to do a deep dive into Walt Hall. He played as a freshman. Panoke played a lot and was hurt at the end of the year. So there was like 4 or 5 guys, people like Hines. They got this New Zealand track star. You heard of this guy? He's like a record breaking. He's never played football before. He's like 24 years old. But then he's not even on the roster. So I was I tried to dive into everyone on the roster, and I couldn't come away confident on any of these guys. But you're right. If you hit on the right one, you'll hit. If they're going to be the run and shoot, someone's going to be profitable. But in my opinion, it's like I'm taking a 1 in 6 chance because I have absolutely, after doing a deep dive, I still have absolutely no idea.
Mike had to inform me that Pinoque apparently it plays exclusively outside, which I had no fucking idea. So I guess he's probably not going to be a slot back in that system. But I've been trying to get up in the DMs of like some Hawaii recruiting people, but so far no success with them getting back to me. We've all got our tactics, but that program seems like they're keeping things pretty close to the chest. You are like the OG. You're the originator of Tylen Hines, as far as I'm concerned. Is the price too high at this point with all of us just trying to get him? Because like I feel like we heard about him like kind of splitting time at slot back earlier in the offseason. He was so efficient last year and did so many cool things when he spelled was it Parson there last year. Is the price too high at this point?
It's too high for me, and it sucks because like I love him. I love him.
Yeah.
But like run and shoot offense, their O-line was like strangely the best in the conference last year, which no one would expect for a complete rebuild. The running game was really good. So some of Hines' numbers, like I think they lose 2 starters, is like I don't know if they're going to be elite up there. They're probably going to run less, run and shoot. The guy is tiny. He might go and slot back. Like he's the best weapon on the offense. So that right away for an offense that could score a lot more points this year than last year. Hopefully they score more points because Prude was pretty bad. I want to like him, but the price, like you're just kind of drafting it. He's now at the range. Like I don't hate him at price. Obviously, I love the kid. Like I'm spewing his propaganda, but it's all about price and draft. So yeah, to me, it's gotten to that point where it's I consider it accurate.
Totally. I was hoping Joey Yellen would be a thing last year, but after seeing him play football, I can't be buying back in this year. The idea with the run and shoot offense from the quarterback, I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, like QB running isn't really a thing unless you're Cole McDonald. Like, or more or less, the value comes really from a quarterbacking perspective, just relative to slinging it all over the place, right?
Yeah.
Or what do you think we can see Shager have real value this year, or is it just are we just gonna see incremental gains for the offense, and it's just not gonna we're not gonna see him put up enough stats to get us there from a season-long perspective?
I'm viewing it as like incremental gains because last year was like total rebuild, and like Chang's getting props for them being better than expected, and they won 3 games. So in my opinion, like Shager, like it was so bad last year. You can't even put it on him, right? Like there's so much more going on. The coordinator didn't know what offense he's running. I don't want to hate on Shager at all, but like I don't think he's an overwhelming talent. I still have questions. We don't know who there's still enough questions to me that like who knows what the ceiling is. The ceiling and run and shoot could be massive, but in my opinion, if he's not going to run, like what is he going to throw for Mikey Keene numbers? That sounds about right to me,
Yeah, the hard part here is like truly what you kind of started with, JD. Like, what offense are they actually going to run? Like I think it came off as like, well, he didn't have the personnel for run and shoot, and so that's why he didn't do it. But then they were talking about like, well, we're implementing the shovel pass this year, and it's like, okay, I'm sorry. What do you actually need to implement a shovel pass? Like Andrew and I can do the shovel pass, like that's a typical play call. And if we're not gonna implement it until year 2, then I'm really concerned about the state of this offense. It'd be nice to see some solidified players and like it'd be somewhat successful. The conference is definitely good or like average enough where a successful offense at Hawaii would be awesome for fantasy. But I think we'll end up seeing Air Force. We've kind of mentioned them a little bit here. This one feels pretty easy. We can just talk running backs, but that's about the only easy part because I think there's like one name that sounds cool, and then the rest of them, there's going to be like 8 random names that are going to pop up in the next 6-8 months. I
was going to say it's easy in that they're like Troy Calhoun lets us. He doesn't just not let us not know things. He actively puts out disinformation there. So the idea that we are going to come on here and say anything like definitively, other than we know that we're being lied to in all likelihood by this dude, is like, I think that foolish on our behalf. But yet you were going to take it in the direction of Eldridge, presumably, right? Yeah. I don't know how I feel about him. Like, he's not the biggest dude, right? Like, thinking back to kind of, like the idea ultimately with Air Forces and the way that they run the option is, okay, get the fullback, hope that they actually they like him enough that he's getting touches around the goal line regularly in conjunction with like seeing actually close to 20 carries a game so he can crest 100 yards. You are literally getting 0 catches from that dude in the traditional role. Does Eldridge meet those criteria? Who knows? I feel like I've read that they're potentially like he's not locked into that fullback job, right? They might kind of use him in different ways, which I mean just would potentially make sense just based on his kind of he feels like more of a kind of an offensive weapon than anything else. I don't know. JD, where are you at? Do you feel confident enough to say anything about this team, or don't want to go on record?
No, not really. I had the same read. Like he was being drafted way higher than I expected, and like I liked Eldridge. I was like, the guy's pretty. I'm a believer in his talent. I think he's going to be the best player on the offense. But like he was drafted really high, and it's like they talked, and I think why it is because they talked about moving him to fullback. But like everything I saw, he was practicing there. It's like what you said about Hines. Like all the running backs practice at slot receiver. Like they cross train. That's what staffs do. And in my opinion, it was not a clear he is moving to fullback. It's like we're going to move him around. We're going to find him touches, which is encouraging. But like you said, the window for an Air Force back is they are a workhorse who gets that. They're not going to get receiving work, right? They're going to get 0 PPR points. So to me, like the window's pretty narrow. I could see him get 1,000 yards, right? Of course. But even then, like I think the offense as a whole is going to take a step back. Like they've been really good. They lose like a 4-year starter at quarterback. They lose, I think Roberts probably led the country in carries or was close to it. And Chase Brown and Mo, he was up there, right? Top 3. So for me, I'm not. I do want to mention a name though, so I'm not going to go on record for Eldridge, but I want to go on record there.
Don't worry, nobody listens to this, so don't worry about
it. Well, if they do, there's a 3-way quarterback competition, and one of the guys has running back eligibility, and he's a high school state 100-meter champion. Well, I know he's a 200-meter champion, but he ran a 10.68 in the 100-meter. Zach Larrier. And he has running back eligibility. It kind of, from reading the tea leaves, sounds like he might be 3rd in the quarterback race. So this might amount to nothing. But yeah, if you want to add him, I think I've tried to snap him up on.
Yeah, I was about to ask. Am I wasting my time looking through all my teams right now?
I have him on a few, but I'm probably gonna have to cut him eventually anyway. So
Nick loves him too. I feel like Nicky and Allen. I feel like whenever he talks Air Force, that he always brings him up. It's like, oh man, it'd be awesome if that dude could find his way to playing quarterback in full time. But yeah, the thing, like he's been injured a bunch too, right? It feels like he hasn't even been like backup when Daniels has gone out in recent years. But yeah, I didn't know about the running back eligibility. That's the dream, right? Finding a quarterback with eligibility at other positions. If you didn't bring it up, I was going to bring up the quarterback battle just because it seems like no one has no idea what's gonna happen there with all those different guys competing for it. But yeah, I mean, there's not a lot to say definitively about Air Force other than they'll probably find ways to be productive in totality and trying to get there from a fancy perspective preseason in terms of feeling good about who's going to produce. You're throwing darts. I mean, I'll probably take some shots in Mountain West best ball, a very common league format that many people play. But outside of that, I don't know. It's tough to really potentially waste real draft capital on them.
The problem with Eldridge, just to circle back real quick, is that he's not big enough necessarily to be fullback. So then you're relying on him to make big plays out of these like outside back positions, or they're going to change their offense and pass enough to these types of backs, which is just not going to happen. And then, the problem too is that you get these random fullbacks that will steal all the touchdowns. Like if you look at Eldridge's last year, he was awesome. He had like 8 yards a carry, almost 100 carries, 4 touchdowns. Like that's just not sustainable for like a system or like a fantasy team that you want to roster. Best ball makes sense, but he's being drafted so high now that it's like, okay, well, I'm not drafting a guy anymore for 4 to 5 awesome weeks. Now he has to have like 8 weeks that are awesome, and that's just not conceivable. I feel like we've been a little bit down on these teams. Let's spice it up. Let's get a little bit with maybe one of the 2 or 3 teams that are super sexy in terms of fantasy. I think we talked Colorado State. That feels like the cool off-season Mountain West team. To me, it feels like the hype has gotten really, really high. It feels like Colorado State's going to be like awesome offensively, and I just don't know if I believe it. JD, where do you stand on their offense? Were you in on them last year, or are you in on them now? Like, what are your takes there for Colorado State?
I think, yeah, because I agree. I guess we're being positive, so I'm trying to be too negative. But like they weren't supposed to suck last year, right? Like, am I remembering this wrong? They were not supposed to be bad. They had a lot of transfers, but that's like what every team does now. And like half of their transfers were Norvell kids, like that he handpicked from his last job, right? He had a bunch of Nevada kids. So every time I hear everyone being high on Colorado State, and there are two options I like on Colorado State, we'll talk about, of course. But every time I hear that, I think like, dude, they weren't supposed to suck last year, and they were third to last in success rate. They're supposed to pass the ball in the offense. They gave up passing, right? They just like, I mean, Millen only had like 245 attempts all year. So they totally changed the offense because it wasn't working. And even when they threw it, they were like 126 in passing success rate. Like it was bad. So overall, I have that. There's no way they don't improve, is what I'll say. There's no way they don't improve. They have Millen back. They have their top two receivers back. The O-line was the worst in the country. They got like 8 transfers. All the transfers are like D2 or FCS. I think only one of them was an FBS transfer, which I thought was weird. So
on the O-line specifically?
On the O-line specifically, yeah. They got like 7 transfers, only one's FBS. I think they might start 5 transfers on the O-line because they were terrible. Like they literally couldn't block.
Yeah, everything that you brought up, success rate, abandoned throwing, like it all is a byproduct of like that O-line was historically bad. Like there's a difference between having an O-line and it's like where it's like, oh, okay, I guess we can't run the ball. We have to get the ball out quick. Like they could barely play football because their O-line was so horrific. Which I think that you can point like, and I was super optimistic on them last year. I had lots of Torrey Horton, really good. Lots of Clay Millen, really bad. So kind of split the difference in that regard. But I think this year they could score 20 points in a game, something they failed to do last year in any one game. But so I think we'll see some gains.
It is funny. It's a good point, JD. Like I've been on Chasing the Natty. I've heard other podcasts. It's like, well, Colorado State, it's the first year of a new system. Like, of course it's going to be bad. We should have realized that. Everybody was in on it last year. And now it's like, well, we're like, oh, well, it should have never, like we should have known better, right? But like you make a great point. A lot of those guys came from that system. So like, why did it not make sense? Well, I think the people that are very pro are going to say, hey, it was the offensive line. Like you can't do anything when the offensive line is that bad. I don't know how many people were transfers. I don't know if that even matters, right? In terms of system transfers. If you're a bad offensive lineman, it doesn't matter what system you're in. You're just bad. You said, JD, you had 2 guys that you liked. Who were Torrey Horton's got to be one, right? Who's the other?
So I think I've seen Katz drafting him too because he's taking them when I want to. But Justice Ross Simmons, the other wide receiver, like he kind of came out of nowhere. He's a big bodied former basketball player. His dude's making one-hand catches. He was only a true freshman. Just came out of nowhere. He posted really great numbers. And that's, again, with the team not functioning, the team not being able to block, the team giving up on the system. And he still produced as a true freshman. So to me, that like solidifies he's wide receiver 2 this year. And I think in Dynasty, like he's an underrated asset. Like right now, he's the clear heir apparent to Norvell, wide receiver 1. And he could be there for 2 years if he stays on campus, which he probably will. He's a pretty raw prospect, right? So I really like Justice Ross Simmons. If we're expecting the offense to take a step forward, you're looking around the assets, like Horton's, correctly viewed as the top asset. And Millen, like, again, he's not going to run a lot. Is the offense going to improve that much where he throws for 4,500 yards? Maybe, but I don't think we're expecting it, right? And then it's like, well, who could possibly take a step up if the team improves? And to me, it's Ross Simmons. Like, I think if the O-line blocks better, they actually take some shots downfield. Like he proved as a true freshman, he's lethal and can beat Mountain West backs consistently. So I like Ross Simmons.
Yeah,
I think one of the cool things about Clay Millen is that his bye week is week 2. I do this like weird bye week thing when I'm drafting. It's like, who are guys that have these weird bye weeks that nobody else has? And I like to target them in a sense because it creates like a gap filler. I mean, Andrew's like the biggest Clay Millen fan there is, but another pass heavy 0 rushing type guy. But to be fair, his system is, if it's good, if it's working, he could produce enough passing to make it make sense. But Andrew, aren't you on Holker, the tight end, Dallin Holker?
Yeah, I forgot I got burned by Tanner Arkin a bit last year as well. And Holker's price has gone up. He was pretty free earlier on in the offseason, but I think kind of just similar to the offense as a whole, like optimism has sprung eternal, right? The idea that, hey, why can't there be another Cole Turner and a Jay Norvell offense? There's optimism surrounding that. Holker, I don't know how much we actually saw him at BYU, but like I feel like I can't remember too much from an actual highlight perspective, but the idea is there, right? Like pass catching tight end, coming over in a system that has featured that kind of dude before. He's not. I would say he's not free enough now where I can feel really good drafting him at the cost, but I still find myself taking him sometimes just because I don't necessarily love a lot of the other tight end options that are still out there. I'm trying to figure out like how this team is likely to line up from a receivers and tight ends perspective, because you've got, all right, Holker as your tight end, and then you've got Ross Simmons and Horton on the outside. Goffney is like, I think he's like a bigger dude too. So like, he's not exactly a slot receiver. I guess probably the most likely outcome is Goffney kind of just mixes in there from a snap perspective, and they play some other dude at slot. Like, it would be so cool just from a video game perspective to get all four of those guys on the field at one time, because that sounds really difficult to guard, especially if Millen gets more than 1.5 seconds to kind of look around and see what's good. But I think that the way that I am just concluding right now how things are likely to shake out, like, okay, you can check the boxes for Horton and Ross Simmons being featured, but then I don't really like how confident can I really be with Holker? I want to be in on Goffney because I loved him at SMU. And it's exciting to see him actually make what on the surface feels like a really smart transfer decision. Maybe not in the immediate, but for the remainder of his career. But I don't know how those things kind of play out in 2023.
Those are four good pieces, man. Like I think we're all high. Like those are four players that should be featured. And Millen, I mean, say what you will about Millen, he broke records last year, right? He broke like a freshman FBS passing record or whatever. Like we like Millen. Millen can clearly throw the ball. Norvell clearly likes him. The system's good, so they have the pieces. I see the optimism.
Yeah, staying positive here. Boise State. I think the only thing negative actually you could say is there's almost like too much talent in the backfield. You know, it's like it'd be nice for them to just separate in some manner or fashion. Taylor Green is awesome. Holani's awesome. G&T is awesome. What's really the question is like, who do you draft first in terms of running backs, and like what the difference is in gaps of rounds there. And then apparently Holani might have 2 years of eligibility.
Can I steer this conversation real quick? So
yes, go ahead.
Zach tried to tell, Zach being a big Boise fan, right, tried to tell us something about their offensive coordinator and like a new OC coming in. And I just didn't read it. What do you know who their OC is, JD? And like, what kind of, is it someone who's going to try and like square peg round hole this thing? Or is he just going to kind of play to the strengths of those awesome players that Chris just mentioned? I totally forget who it is. And
Bush Hamden, I believe. I think it's Bush Hamden. He was at Washington with Chris Peterson when they had the two running backs. What was it? Ahmed and Gaskin. They both ended up going to the same NFL team, right? Miami.
Okay.
But yeah, it's Bush. I don't know enough about him to feel confident. I remember for some reason I like saw the hire and was really negative, and then the more I looked into it, it was like those Washington teams were really innovative, really fun. He's under Chris Peterson, a coach I respect, offensively. Well, basically respect for everything, really highly. But no, I didn't have a strong read diving into Hamden, how the offense would play out with all the talent.
That's good to know, though. The idea that his system could support two guys that maybe they don't cannibalize each other, but they both kind of eat. 10th round rolls around. G&T and Holani are both there in a best ball draft. Who are you taking?
I think Holani.
Yeah.
Same. I mean, he's old. He's been there forever. They're not going to like just push him to the side, right? Like I know that GT is like the newer guy. They want to keep him happy, but like to me, Helani doesn't come back if he doesn't think he's.
What do you think happened? So going into the bowl game last year, like I didn't even think Helani was going to play. I played Genty in DFS. Helani like played 2 series and then was like, peace, I'm out of here. Like, and then all of a sudden he's coming back and running it back for 2023. You think the NIL just came through, or he looked around, transfer options weren't there, didn't want to be one of those the zillion undrafted free agents waiting into NFL training camps? All 3?
Could be. I guess I tried to, if we're trying to stay positive, I viewed it as like Boise should run through the Mountain West this year, and he wants a piece of that. He's been there a while. Yeah. That was my positive look on it.
You don't have to be positive, you know, because there's plenty of negativity to come when we talk Wyoming and Nevada and stuff. It is interesting. Andrew, I think it's probably a little bit of NIL. I think it's a little bit of like he kind of wanted to maybe test the waters and saw like these are all the guys that are available. Like, is it especially if he was told, hey, by the way, you have 2 years on, the next 2 years are college eligible. Like he probably saw it as like, well, I play another year, I make a little bit of cash, and I still then have another, like a decision to make. It's not like he had to go after next year if this whole rumor is true. So like he might have a little bit of leverage there and makes sense. But it is always weird coming back when you have like a stud young guy that's like kind of waiting in the wind. But Taylor Green feels like a really interesting, if you're doing like a dynasty startup, he feels like a really interesting prospect because he is pretty run focused. He was very effective on the ground. He looks pretty decent passing the ball, and the offense is going to be good. The conference is good. JD, like if you were doing a dynasty startup or maybe thinking like in that realm, like is he one of your higher options because he's on an automatic 2 years, or where do you stand there?
Yeah, I like Green. I just think there's so many boxes. Like the floor's pretty safe, right? Like another thing I like about him. So guys who have fantasy 0 showing up in their fantasy points per game, right? That dropped down. So I think his average was like 20 fantasy points per game last year, but there's 2 zeros on there from when he didn't play. Okay. So it was actually like 24 fantasy points. And when he did that, like that young, and I know there's backfield mates to contend with, but him being like just such an electric rusher should only get better. The wide receiving room wasn't good, but they returned everybody from a year ago. So in my opinion, it's like, I don't really see how he falls down from 24 fantasy points per game. And if he does, it's not going to be much. Like I think the rushing's so safe. So I actually like him as like a third option, especially if you're swinging, for the fences early on with like a Tyler Shuck or someone else who either has high variance or injury prone. Mm-hmm. I do like him probably starting multiple years in Dynasty. I do like the rushing should only improve. So yeah, I'm pretty high on Green.
He's so big. He's 6'6", 220 per ESPN. So I'm sure it's a little bit off, but like that's huge. And he looks huge. He runs well. I think he had a long, he had a long touchdown. Yeah. He had a 91 touchdown. It was 91 against Utah State. And as a true freshman, like you said, JD, he also had games where like the Oregon State game, didn't he come in at half? Because that was the whole Hank Bachmeier, like looked awful type situation. So his averages could have been much better. Andrew, I'll let you maybe steer it here. Is there a team you want to talk next?
You want to get Nevada out of the way?
Let's get Nevada out of the way.
All right, sweet.
Nevada.
Nevada. I've been placing some small bets on Sean Dollars emerging from the running back room. They like you read articles and they about what's going on right with him and running backs there. It's like, all right, there's like 9 guys, but like at the same time, like, are any of these actually good enough to play? These guys good enough to play FBS football? They lost all their production last year. I guess the primary question is just after missing like 3 years with injuries, is this dude's body at all representative of whatever netted him like a top 60 recruit coming out of whatever class like 4 years ago it was? Still, it feels like their offense will be, if they can run it effectively, it'll be pretty ground heavy. And if like, there's no way he's not the most talented guy in the room. So I don't know. I like to make lots of late round running back bets and kind of hope they pay off. And he's one that I've been kind of enjoying throwing some chips down on lately.
Dollars feels interesting because he feels like the type of guy that would be successful in the G5. Like he drops down from P5 to G5. He's shown to be able to catch the ball. He had 16 catches last year. Big recruit. He's 5'8", 199, so good size for G5. Good enough size for G5. Everybody else is awful in that offense. Like if Brandon Lewis is your quarterback, like you're winning like 3 games, right, JD?
Yeah, the rest of the offense stinks. I like your guys' read on Dollars, actually. I think it is a total swing or miss because like the way Oregon was talking about him, it's like, if he ever gets back on the field, that'd be cool. But he did get back on the field, right? And like it was never a talent thing. Like he was always supposed to be very talented. It's just it's a totally a health thing. So if we assume full health, there's nothing else on the offense to go to. There's nothing else. And they're talking about wanting to use the running back. We've seen them use the running back. Dollars, right, has familiarity with Wilson, the head coach from Oregon. Like it seems pretty clear he targeted Dollars to come be the next guy if he's healthy. So I think you're correct. That's the only asset on this team.
There's some crazy stat where like they haven't had a 1,000-yard back. Well, I guess it's not that crazy because I forgot that Jay Norvell was there before. But yeah, they haven't had a 1,000-yard back in a bunch of years, which is just weird because you like remove the Norvell gap and like you just think about them churning out backs with the pistol and stuff like that. But anyway, I digress. Where to now, Chris?
The reason why I think this conference is like awesome but awful at the same time is that like San Diego State used to be like this team where you figure out who the RB1 is, you just love having that guy, and like for like the last 2-3 years it's been here's 4 different guys and we're gonna run them 12 times each, and we don't know who's going to be the one that runs it 18 times. It's just like a grab bag of guys, and nobody ever has any idea about what's going on. Like we had the USC transfer, we've had different like bigger name freshmen come in, and nothing has changed. So like that's what's annoying to me with this conference. JD, the running back situation is typically awesome. Do you have a pulse on this at all? Please tell me. I think I'm coming up on being on the clock here, which would be good. If you got something good for me.
My whole thing on San Diego State is just to like try to be totally off the running game until they've shown signs of improvement, because it's been like massive steps downward every year. Like it's getting worse, like from elite record-setting rushing attacks to terrible. So the thing with Kristen, like I'm definitely out on Kristen. I've been really disappointed. The spring reports are like he's still the RB1. He is what he is. He's a track star. His profile was hilarious. So he was first in the entire country in breakaway percentage, right? Like basically he breaks long runs. And he was like, I think he was second to last or third to last in like yards after contact per 10 broken tackles. He just doesn't break a tackle. So to me, that's not going to be a guy who goes for 1,000 yards. I don't know how you can do that in this offense if you're not going to break a single tackle ever. I like Jalen Armstead. I really like that kid. I was really hoping he'd be RB1 because he had similar like super high breakaway percentage, but he can't break tackles, right? And he's bigger. And like Lucky Sutton, people like. So I think it's a good room behind him. Like if Christian goes down or they just forget he exists, maybe just use him exclusively on screens like they probably should. I would be interested. But for me, I'm totally out on the running room until they show signs of improvement. Like it's been bad. They've forgotten how to block and they've forgotten how to run the ball. And that's all they did for like 10 years. So yeah, it's been bad.
I thought Jalen Maiden was like pretty interesting. Like towards the end of the year, I was like, man, like San Diego State's like actually actively trying to throw the football instead of throwing it like 18 times. And he was a younger guy. He seemed very, fairly successful. He had like some nice receiver transfers or just older guys, but now they're all gone. Like, is there any chance, Andrew? Like, do you like Maiden at all? Have you picked him at all? Like, is there I mean, like I know that like San Diego State quarterback is not all that juicy, but he's a bigger guy and he can run the football. So like the volume is a little bit higher than your typical like average offense, not the greatest offensive style.
I feel like he's another JD crush. I don't know. Do you think in IDP leagues he retains like safety eligibility and can get like the 300 yards passing or whatever? Maybe we float that question in Justice or one or the other. people that plays CFF IDP at some point, because I'm curious of that. But it was interesting just to, like, it felt like he was one of those guys who would put up decent passing yardage without necessarily throwing it a ton. And like, yeah, of course the dude's athletic. Like, he used to play on the in a defensive backfield, right? I have no idea what they're going to do this year from like a schematic perspective. Ryan Lindley is the OC, right at this point. Who knows what that means? I don't know. Yeah, I think that's just the best way to put it. I have no idea what to expect from him. Like, do you have any sort of read, JD?
Yeah, so I find it interesting. So he's been saying, because he coached under a number. He's not that old, right? It feels like he was just playing. But he coached under Andy Ludwig for a few years. So basically, he like went on record saying he wants to style the offense like Utah. So I view them as being a poor man's Utah this year, which Maiden kind of fits that mold as like a Cam Rising, right? It's hard to be like Utah's formula works because they kind of bully the Pac-12 teams in the trenches. Like San Diego State sucked in the trenches and they haven't been able to run the ball. So I could see in like 2-3 years that they could be Utah. Right now, it's like the formula, it can't work, right? It should work in the Mountain West. They've been able to do that before. Maybe they turned the tables. All it took is a coaching change. But anyway, so for me, when I heard the Andy Ludwig and I heard him, say how much he loves tight ends, that's why I've been drafting Mark Redmond in a few. We do this stupid deep tight end premiums. It's like he's going to be out there. He's not like he's pretty slow and clunky, but like if he's going to be on the field and they lose their top 2 wide receivers and Maiden's decently interesting, I'm picturing like a Walmart Utah this year.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the receiver group, it's like Mekhi, Shaw, Breon Penny, Raphael Williams. Like these are guys that have not shown to do really anything. Not that they won't, but like if you're looking at an offense that's trying to be compared to Utah, a later tight end premium league, why not? Right, with a guy like Redmond.
Speaking of bullying, though, they tried to bully their way out of the Mountain West. I was super busy while it was going on. What was the deal? They couldn't pay
they wrote like a letter and it said like this is our formal notice that we're leaving. And then like when they were called their bluff on it, they were like, oh no, we didn't really mean that. That was just like a weird, like taken the wrong way, right? That's how I took it.
There's like, I forget the penalty, but it's like, I don't know, I'll say $10 million. It's like $1 million, however many $1 million penalty if they leave at the end of June. So they were trying to avoid that penalty. So they said like, hey, we want to leave, but we're not leaving, but please don't penalize us. And correctly, Mountain West was like, why would we do that?
And so they're back now.
Yeah, because they don't have a bid. So they're trying to leave when they don't have a bid. So unless they were going to go independent, I'm not sure what the plan was.
San Diego State as an independent could be fun because it could feel like they would just play a bunch of East Coast teams. I enjoy that type of stuff where it's like this random West Coast team plays a random East Coast team for the first time. Like those newer, like that's why bowl season for me is a little bit interesting because you get like these cool random matchups. But anyway, speaking of bowls, New Mexico. Do we think no, I'm not going to say that. This is another team, right, where there's like maybe one fantasy asset, the running back, Washington, right? Like maybe.
They I feel like there's some little sprinkle of optimism just from the fact that they're porting over. Who is it? The UAB quarterback and OC. So the idea is like, okay, maybe the offense won't be so anemic and it can be like kind of successful in the way that UAB's was. But I don't know. They're still New Mexico. I don't have much more to say.
JD, you're closer to it than us, literally and figuratively. What do you think?
They're not interesting. I could see like they might be more like it's hard to be worse than they were. So you get the UAB quarterback and OC together. Hopkins is the best quarterback they've seen in however many years, whatever that means, right? So you could see him being like slightly more functional. The running back was interesting. His PFF metrics were actually like okay. So if you try to take like a Sean Dollars approach, where like UAB's had some good backs, like it's hard to compare him to McBride or whatever, but I could see them being on the radar, but no, I'm totally out. If I had to in like the Mountain West best ball, I might target.
Is the running back a transfer or is it just a holdover?
I think he was there last year.
I think he was there last year. Yeah, I think actually Volume Pigs has written about him too. Christian Washington is his name.
Word.
It's just such a bad offense. It's like they want to run it so much. Like last year, I think they ran it, looking at the numbers, probably like 60% of the time. And I think in previous years, they were a little bit even like heavier focused on one specific guy. So like I can see the appeal of like a running back one there, but you actually have to be like somewhat decent at running the football, which is what is concerning, I think, for the three of us.
The vibes are bad for New Mexico, right? Because they had the I'm going to blank on his name, but the former San Diego State defensive coordinator, right, Rocky Long, and that was like a great hire. And now all of a sudden he's gone, and they like still have Danny Gonzalez for some reason, who's a defensive mind, and it's just bad. And like I think their top 3 defensive players transferred out, so the vibes are really bad in New Mexico.
Yeah, he's getting canned after this year, the coach, right? Yeah.
All right, so we got 2 teams left. I'd like to end with UNLV. So let's talk Wyoming. We got this was an offense that like felt pretty cool because like Titus Swen was used a lot, and like in previous years there's been some fantasy relevant guys. Does Harrison Whaley take over as that like fantasy relevant player for Wyoming, or it feels like he's being underdrafted? So I'm like, in my head, I'm like, what is the negative here? So he transfers from Northern Illinois. He presumably takes over as the running back 1, but doesn't feel like he's being drafted that way. JD, are you drafting him as like the running back 1, or are you cautious?
I think I've been overly cautious, and then when I did the Mountain West write-up for the guide, I became way more bullish on him, just because like Wyoming is so simple, right? Like it's going to be the running back if it's going to be anyone, and like they lose their top wide receivers. Like there's nothing in the passing game, the same quarterback, the same everything. I think the only drawback for Whaley is like if he's going to be RB1, I think it's a question. They have 3 good running backs, so it's like maybe they would split the carries, right? They have Dwayne McNeely is solid, and they have DQ James, who's a burner. Like he's going to get a handful of carries. So that was kind of in my mind. Like I'm not sure he's the RB1, but the more I looked at it, like he has a better track record than those guys, right? He's proven he can be a bit of a workhorse, even though I know he's kind of broken down before, right? He's a good pass catcher. In Wyoming, like they returned like 20 starters or something crazy. Like the defense is they return everything on the defense. So in my opinion, they're going to be even more Wyoming than they've ever been Wyoming, right? Like Bulls just going all in. So I became more bullish on Whaley. I think there's the drawback where it's a talented room, and he hasn't really stayed healthy before, but like if he stays healthy, I mean, it's a pretty clear like 1,300 yards in my opinion. So
yeah, I think the price is right. No pun intended. Like I was guilty of paying the way too high premium for Swen last year. Like the bar was too high for him to reach that in that offense without everything going immaculately. But not like between rounds 9 and 11 for Whaley. That's fine. That's cool. I think we're all talking ourselves into him now more, just kind of running through this exercise. But am I correct recalling that either one or both of DQ James and McNeely got hurt / very hurt at the end of last year?
They were on their like 7th string running back for the bowl game. I think it was 6th string. They didn't have a guy who had a single carry in the bowl game against and I think they won the bowl game too, right? It was the Barstool.
Yeah.
That was that Arizona Bowl. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. You're right. Good call.
But yeah, so we haven't really seen those guys. So maybe if those guys were healthy in the bowl, they would have gone for like 200 yards. The staff seems to like them.
Well, that's a commonality with Wyoming, right? Didn't Levi Williams do that out of nowhere at Wyoming? Did I make that up? Wasn't Levi Williams from Wyoming?
Yeah. Dude, he lit Kent State on fire, and the year before, I think it was Georgia State, he lit on fire.
Dude, Andrew, you can't leave me hanging like that. I had just total doubt after making that comment. We are the Levi Williams gang.
They traded him. He was in the Peasley trade. They traded him.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe one day wouldn't that be? I can't wait. Maybe one day there's trades in college football. We'll see.
I guess, sorry, one more thing, Kay. Before I did, because we were positive on Whaley, I guess another drawback I had is like Valade, right? I was too high on him the year he was being drafted highly. Was that 2 years ago? And then he goes to Arizona State, and no one expects anything, and he blows up. So it's like, is that in the back here? Because that's in the back of my mind. Like I've been too high on Valade before. Whaley's probably not as good as Valade. Does that give you any pause at all?
My only pause here is that like the offense is just so bad that like, and like they very confidently know that their running back room is the best, right? Like they have 3 very decent to good players, relatively speaking. So my pause is that they do hammer the run, but they do mix it up enough.
Okay.
When you have 3 running backs, it just worries me that they start using multiples.
You've read the recruiting story of Whaley to Wyoming, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Chris, it's basically he goes in the portal. The coaches from Wyoming are like just immediately call him up because they're like, "You're that dude that burned us for 220 a couple of years ago and didn't break a sweat. Like, come over here. Well, you'll like we really want you. We'll do whatever we can as far as Wyoming can go, whatever, et cetera, et cetera." So it was not like sometimes it feels like guys going to portal and they just long winding path find their way onto a campus eventually. Like he was actively recruited to go there, presumably like not through the lens of, hey, come here and battle DQ James and Dwayne McNeely for carries. Like I'm sure they sold him on it, which I mean, who knows what that really means, but you could without too much difficulty drop a story where he's going to be featured.
Okay. So maybe the only negative there is, or like the drawback would be more that it's such a bad offense. They just don't score enough for him to be super valuable. But wrapping it up, UNLV, Aiden Robbins out. He went to BYU, which I am a big fan of, only because he proved me wrong while he was at UNLV. They replaced him with Vincent Davis, which is like, if you could replace a guy with another guy, and make it like the complete polar opposites, it feels like Vincent Davis is that guy, right? Like Robbins is like 6'4", 240, right? And Vincent Davis is like 5'8", $180. Am I correct in that? Like, what does this fit, JD? Like, there's no possible way that he gets the heavy usage that Robbins got, right?
I don't think so. And yeah, because it's going to be him and then the other guy, the returner, Courtney Reese. The metrics again were way better than I thought they'd be, but he's like $170. So you got $170, $180. You're going to a Texas OC that sounds like he wants to throw the ball around a little more. You got a dual threat running back. I could see people trying to chase Robbins from last year was way too cheap, right? But I agree with you. I just don't see it being a perfect fit. Like it's a scheme change. We're now multiple years removed from the Charles Williams scheme, right? I see the offense changing a little bit.
Yeah, maybe this is a passing game bump because Davis is good in the passing game, if I remember right. Like he was like that Pitt running back that was good in the passing game. They have Brumfield, who is like, to me, feels very like legitimate for college football quarterbacks, right? Like, Andrew, are you on Brumfield at all, or do you have a running back take here?
Brumfield, I think, is a perfect example of the type of quarterback you're going to want to play early on in season in anywhere you own him and or in DFS. Like he, I think, can be really awesome. And like Marion is actually implementing his go-go offense, right? Or at least I've assumed he is. Lots of quarterback running. Like it all seems like it kind of funnels through the quarterback, and I don't know. I feel like don't let me put words in your mouth if they're not true, JD, but I feel like you're a Brumfield fan. And every time I've watched him, I'm like, this dude is talented. He can like use his legs. I like what he does with his arm. Problem is, right, dude is made of glass, and now we're talking about an offense that is heavily built around running the quarterback. So how long into the season before this dude goes down, which he does every single year and misses multiple games. But for the games he's able to see through from beginning to end, I think he's going to be highly productive.
Yeah. I am a Brumfield guy. I like him in the later rounds. Like he kind of has what I'm looking for, like as an underrated asset, right? Like health wise, I don't think people realized how effective he was against bad defenses at times. And like you said, he's playing enough bad defenses this year. You can kind of you can see it in your head, right? It's like how Tagovailoa has been at Maryland, right? If he's playing a legit defense, sit him. If he's playing a crap team, he could get 28 points. But Brumfield's like a legit dual threat. And yeah, I agree with you. I think he looks really good. Like I was at the San Jose State game where he went down in like the first quarter and that offense fell apart and I was not expecting it, right? Because they have experienced guys behind them. They have 5-star Harrison Bailey, right? They have Cam Friel was like the Mountain West freshman of the year. I didn't expect the offense to fall apart and it was totally different. Sometimes you give credence to what the opposing coaching staff say, right? Like they've been like super effervescent about him. Like he's just like he's a game changer with it. Like I want to put words in their mouth, but they've been using like words that like make like you have to game plan for him. Like he is the offense. And I think it's a perfect fit with what's his name, Marion. And the wide receivers are good, dude. They got Ricky White, they got Jeff Weimer, they got Rafael De Jesus, the 5'6" dude in the slot who went for 1 million yards in the spring game. So yeah, I think he's got everything I'm looking for. Like there's a lot of ifs, but that's the reason like it's a cheap asset, right? If there's the health, right? If all the ifs, but you can easily see him averaging 25 fantasy points a game out of quote unquote nowhere.
Weimer just went to the portal, if I recall correctly. I'm on the fence on, like, I think I lean toward Ricky White over the De Jesus guy. I can craft a conspiracy theory in my head that they got De Jesus all those targets so that they could put together the story of this guy had a great spring game and then he proposed to his fiance right afterward. And you don't want to be proposing after you go 2 catches for 19 yards, right? So maybe they just kind of ran up a stat line to like make it a real winning day for him.
To really beef up the story where they talk to their grandkids about it in 50 years, right?
I could buy it. I didn't have that same conspiracy going through my head, but I did think, I'm like, was he planning on like doing it that day, or did he only like, this is the biggest game
like
of his
a chicken
life?
egg thing here?
Yeah.
I was thinking, because I could see the hype around him, and I'm like, I don't know. He's like 5'7", and the biggest game of his life was in the spring game, and I don't want to be negative. Like, congrats to the guy, but yeah, similar thoughts. Yeah,
a little fishy. They do have a good receiving group, like college speaking, right? Like I think Ricky White, I don't know his NFL prospects. That's not my thing at all, but like he's very, very serviceable to very, very solid for a college football receiver. He had a bunch of big games. And who's the other guy that was there? Kyle Williams, right? Like they had like 2 really pretty good receivers, and now Kyle Williams is at Washington State. So maybe Ricky White, I don't know where he's being picked in drafts these days, and maybe he's like a little bit underrated, because if they're going to just be passing a bunch and just try to move fast, like why would you not want the receiver one? So
I buy it, dude. I think it's all positive. And Robbins isn't there to like, he caught a lot of passes too. Like he was the focal point. Like I think it's clear that this offense needs a focal point, and like the market's high on UNLV, dude. Their win total is what, like 6.5, 7? Like they're supposed to be a winning team. And if this team is winning games, like
there's no way they get there without Brumfield being awesome. There's no way they win 7 without that.
Yeah. So, Chris, you finished your thought before
that was it. Yeah, just straight up. I didn't know what the win total was, but like everybody's got to be on Brumfield if they think 7 wins is possible.
That feels really high. Like
it does.
I'm positive. Like I feel good as well from a vibes perspective, especially like thank goodness we have a Royal at the door at this point. But I don't know. I haven't looked at the schedule, and like schedule is so crucial when it comes to like thinking about how win totals are going to be set and how they're going to play out and whatnot. But I don't know. That feels, it just feels like a number that's going to be difficult to attain.
So they have a pretty typical schedule. They have Bryant to start. They play at Michigan. They play home against Vandy, which is super interesting because it's like, okay, well, you're playing an SEC school, but you're like, it's not like it's at home. It's not like Vandy is like world beaters by any means. Like
it's like a good competitive game where like you could actually go back and forth. And I was gonna say Michigan, it looks bad. Ricky White's the Michigan beater, right? Didn't he have like 200 yards? So
when he was at Michigan State, he had like a huge game. So I mean, I think we can all agree that's not going to happen. But I mean, like for a non-conference schedule, they play at UTEP.
They should just snip Brumfield in the Michigan game. Like you don't want that.
Yeah. So, and then they play your typical Mountain West schedule. Home against San Jose State, which is home against Colorado State, home against Hawaii. So some like maybe some favor, like of the home games, that's kind of some of the ones you want to give yourself a shot. Home against Wyoming. So yeah. All right. So we typically end this with what are we the most confident on, whether it's team, player, fantasy focused, anything. You could hit us with anything. This coach is fired, or this guy is going to be a top 30 receiver, whatever, right? I'll kick it to Andrew first to give yourself a second, JD. What are you most confident, Andrew, with the Mountain West?
That Holani doesn't come back for another year next year. Like I didn't read all the granular details of this conversation that I feel like Like you're leading the tinfoil hat crew with this stupid 2 years of eligibility thing. Like, I don't know. I think we can all just kind of do the math and like not try to invent that this guy somehow has an extra year after this year. What I'm most confident on is George Helani does not play college football in 2024.
Okay. JD, what do you got? You got something, or you need another minute, another 30 seconds?
I think I'm going to go. I felt like I was the most confident when I was talking about Justice Ross Simmons. So I'll go with him. Again, this year, we'll see about this year, but I'm going to say I feel most confident that he's like my favorite value in dynasty leagues in this conference.
Okay.
It's a good one.
I think he's an underrated dynasty asset.
I will say I was between two, so I'll talk about both. But I guess the thing I'm most confident in is that everybody's way too high on Colorado State. Not that Ross Simmons is a bad option.
Darn.
But I just think, relatively speaking, about like, I think we're at the point in the offseason where it's like, what's the cool thing to talk about? And it's like, Colorado State's like so good, right? Like, I think they'll be better, like 100%. But like, to me, Millen is at best a decent floor guy. You know, like they don't have a running back that's going to provide any value. Torrey Horton's awesome, but I mean, it's hard to be a top 5 fantasy receiver and be in like the worst offense ever. So like, I'm curious, does he, regress a little bit? Simmons is very quality. Does Millen start sharing the ball a little bit more? That type of thing. The other thing I was thinking about was Hawaii just being like just awful again. Just like that was my other thing I was considering. Like, is Hawaii just like the worst team ever again? They don't even know their own identity. But I'll stick with Colorado State. So awesome. Well, JD, tell us, you just released real quick before we wrap up where we can find you, and then talk about what you guys released over at Devy Watch. I think it was about a week ago. Kind of plug yourself a little bit.
Yeah, so you can find my work over at Devy Watch. We just released the 2023 CFF guide. So dove into so Devy Watch has been doing their conference previews for a while now, right? So this is my second year taking over, and I said, this is so much work and so much. We dive into all the schemes. I give the 5-year history, wide receiver, quarterback, tight end, yada yada, and then my thoughts on pretty much every player. And I said, what? There's so much work that goes into this. Let's just put it into a nice digestible guide. So this year we made it into a guide. So yeah, that came out last week, and really pleased with it. Really pleased to be done with it now too, so I can actually enjoy my summer. But yeah, awesome. Thanks for having me on. I had a lot of fun. This is good.
Yeah, appreciate you having you on. I think Andrew and I would both agree, the more we do these, the more fun it is to have people on, different guests and stuff like that. So appreciate you hopping on to talk about in the West. Not the sexiest, but there's definitely some gold out there. And maybe in 12 months, we'll be talking about some players a little bit differently. Like, oh, well, we should have known better, but here we are.
Yeah, thanks for hanging with us, dude.
Yeah, appreciate you hopping on. Hope everybody enjoyed it. We'll talk next week. I don't know what conference we're doing. That's Andrew's thing. So we'll talk then. We'll figure it out and have everybody have a great rest of your week. Thanks, guys.